All right, good evening, and welcome to Mishnah Mastery. Ba, 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 ba. We are going to be doing chapter 3 of Maseches Pesachim tonight, and if we look here, we're going to get chapter 4 in as well. So buckle up, people. To all of you on Zoom, to all of you watching on YouTube, great to have you on board. Here is the text. Give me a thumbs up on the screen if you can see all that. Lovely. Let's do it. Says the Mishnah in chapter 3 of Pesachim. Elu Ovrin B'Pesach. What are we talking about? So we are talking about chametz. Not only real chametz, which is asa, but there's lots of different types of chametz that have to be disposed of. Now, to be liable to kares, to the punishment of kares, or for lashes, you would have to eat a kazayas of real chametz. So that's the background to the isurim of chametz. But the truth is that any amount of chametz has to be destroyed for Pesach, even if it's a small portion of a mixture. So the Mishnah says, Elu Ovrim B'Pesach. These are the people who are going to violate, so to speak, Pesach. These are the things that have to be gotten rid of to be able to go into Pesach without infringing the laws of eating or consuming chametz. Says the Mishnah, Kutach Habavli, Babylonian Kutach. What is that? That was a dish made with milk, salt, and pieces of bread. Yum. Continues the Mishnah. The Sheikhar Hamadi, Median beer, which had a small content of chametz, but nonetheless you have to get rid of it. The Chometz Ha'adomi, which they translate there as Idumean vinegar. It was made with barley, and that is why it would be problematic. The Sisum HaMitzri, Egyptian zitom or beer, which was also made with barley. The Zoman Shel Tzabayin, which is a water mixture that contained bran as a thickening agent. It was what the people that would dye garments used to use. Va'amilan Shel Tabachim, the dough of butchers, or other. Is that what it translates it there as? Cook's dough. Okay, not butchers. But it had residue from grain, which was used to clean the pots, and so that could become chametz. The kolan shel sofrin, and the glue of scribes, which had a chametz content. All of these things you'd have to get rid of. Rabbi Eliezer says, Aftach shitei nashim, even women's jewelry or ornaments. For example, a face mask, that kind of thing. Anything that they would apply to their faces which would contain chametz, you have to get rid of. Says the Mishnah, Zehaklal, this is the general rule. Kol shehum min dagan, anything that is the product, the byproduct of grain, harei zeh over b'Pesach. These things have to be gotten rid of on Pesach. You are going to be violating Pesach by having these things in your possession. Harei elu ba'azhara, they are subject to a warning, vehein bahen mishum kares. But you are not going to get punished with the punishment of kares if you do end up consuming these things, because they are not literal, real chametz. They are kind of chametz products. So that is why the ruling is a little bit different. Continuing with Mishnah base. Says the Mishnah, Batsek Shepasitke Areva, the dough that was left in the cracks of kneading bowls. Says the Mishnah, Yesh Kazayis B'makom Echad Chayiv Levaer. If there is an olive bulk's worth left in one area of the kneading bowl, then you have to get rid of it. Continues the Mishnah, Ve'im lo batel b'miuto. Then the Mishnah says, if it's not the size of a kazayas, then it's going to be nullified due to the smallness of its quantity. V'chein le'inyan tuma. So too with regards to tuma. Says the Mishnah, Makpid alav chotzeitz. if you are really, really concerned about it, and it really, really bothers you to have it there, then it's going to create a chatzitza. It's going to be impossible to purify the item if you are strict and particular about having that residue left on the bowl. Vimrotze b'kiyumo, continues the Mishnah, but if you don't mind it being there, harehu kareva, then it's going to have the same din as the kneading bowl. Batsek hacheresh, with regards to batsek hacheresh, which translates it there as deaf dough, but it means that it's dough that will not rise. And so we would think that maybe it's not chametz. If the mixture is big enough that a similar dough would become chametz, says the Mishnah, hareze asur, then it is going to be considered as chametz. It's going to be asur. So even though this particular dough might not be rising, if it is the size and the the quantity of the ingredients, if it was in any other case, would have actually risen and become chametz. Therefore, we have to get this and dispose of this as well. Okay, moving on to Mishnah Gimel. By way of background, by way of introduction to this Mishnah, we have to take off a portion of dough when we make a certain amount of dough and give it to a kohen in a portion known as challah. If the challah is contaminated with ritual impurity, if it is tameh, then a kohen is not allowed to eat it. If a person has tameh dough, then there is a problem. He can't separate challah to bake on Yom Tov if the food can't be eaten on Yom Tov because the challah is tameh, and he cannot leave it because it will become chametz. So, asks the Mishnah, Ketzad mafrishin challah batuma b'Yom Tov. How are you supposed to separate challah on Pesach from a dough which is in a state of ritual impurity? Says the Mishnah, Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Rabbi Eliezer says, Lo sikra la shem, don't give it a name of challah ad shete'afeh, until you have baked it up. Once you've baked it up, then all you would need to do is separate it from its completed state. And that way you're not going to run into problems of things becoming chametz. Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira Omer. Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira says, Tatil b'tsonen. You should make sure that you put the dough in cold water. And if you put the dough into cold water, then it's going to slow down the chametz process. Rabbi Yehoshua. Rabbi Yehoshua said, Lo zehu chametz shemuzharim alav b'val yiraya b'val yimatzeh. He says, this is not quite, I'm sorry, I've got a little bit of background noise, so I'm just going to put some mute on. I don't know if it's the wind or what, but it's keep feeling like people are trying to ask a question. If you do have a question, just unmute yourself and do chime in. So continues the Mishnah. Rabbi Yehoshua. Rabbi Yehoshua. This is not the chametz that the Pesachim were cautioning on us when they said that you could violate it for having it in your house and seeing it. That is not quite what the Pesachim were saying. So, because of that, Rabbi Yehoshua says, rather you can separate it and you can leave it over until the evening. And if it ferments, and if it becomes chametz, then it becomes chametz. And I think the reason for this is because it's no longer under your ownership by separating it, because you are designating it for someone else. If that's not the reason, then maybe you have got a reason in front of you. But nonetheless, according to Rabbi Yehoshua at the very least, he says that is what you can do with this challah. Moving on to Mishnah Dalet. Rabban Gamliel Omer. Rabban Gamliel says, Shlosh nashim lashos ka'achas va'ofos b'tanu echad. If you've got 3 women who are kneading dough at the same time, and they're baking in one oven, so, zo achazo, this one after this one after the other. So Rabban Gamliel says that's completely fine. 3 women are allowed to be processing dough, and we don't need to be concerned that it's going to be become chametz. The Chachamim say that 3 women can be involved with dough, but they should be working on the same dough at the same time. So rather than each one processing on their own, it should be like a chain. Achas lasha, there should be one woman who kneads, achas oreves, and one oreches, and one who's going to shape the dough, achas ofa, and one who takes responsibility for the baking of these matzahs. Rabbi Akiva says, Lo chol anashim v'lo chol ha'etzim v'lo chol ha'tanuim shavim. He says that it's not always going to be that the various permutations and combinations of the process are going to result in a risk of chametz. So not all women are the same, not all wood is the same, they don't all burn the same, and not all ovens are the same. And so according to Rabbi Akiva, you can be a little bit more relaxed and not have to worry that it's going to become chametz if it's having a little bit of time to rest. Zeh haklal, says the Mishnah, tafach tiltosh b'tzoinen. This is the general rule. If you see that it's starting to rise, then just says here you should slap it with hands dipped in cold water. If you see that it's starting to bloat, then it is still possible to salvage the dough and stop it from rising and becoming a problem of chametz. Continuing with Mishnah 5. Seur. Seur is a kind of sourdough. Yisaref, you should burn it. V'ha'ochlo patur. The one who eats it is going to be patur. It's not edible, and that is why you are not going to be chayav if you eat it. You're not allowed to eat it, but if you do eat it, then you are going to be exempt from any punishment. Continues the Mishnah siduk. If it is siduk, which means if it's cracked, then yisaref, then you should burn it. V'ha'ochlo chayav kares, and the person who eats this type of dough is actually going to be liable for the death penalty. Asks the Mishnah, Ezahu seur, what is seur? Answers the Mishnah, karnei chagavim. It is when the surface is cracked, like, or there are lines on it like locusts' horns, or more relevantly, the antennae of locusts or grasshoppers. Siduk, what is siduk? Shenis arvu sadakav zebazeh. This is when the cracks have intermingled with each other, mixed together. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. That is the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. The Chachamim say zeh v'zeh ha'ochlo chayav kares. For both seur and siduk types of doughs, you're going to be chayav if you end up eating them. You're going to be chayav kares, spiritual excision. Ve'zehu seur, what is it? Kol shichsifu panav ka'adam she'amdu sa'arosav. It is when the surface of this dough becomes pale, like the face of a man whose hair is standing on end. So if that is what this is looking like, then according to Chachamim, that is going to be seur. That's going to be classified as seur, and a person is going to be liable for kares, spiritual excision, cut off, if they end up eating it. Says the Mishnah in Mishnah Vav. How are we going to get around the issue of getting rid of chametz on Shabbos? Says the Mishnah, Arba Asar Shechal Liyos b'Shabbos. If the 14th of Nisan falls on a Shabbos, right? So it's Erev Pesach on Shabbos. What do we do? Mevarim Esakol Melifnei HaShabbos. Then we get rid of everything before Shabbos. Divrei Rabbi Meir. That's the opinion of Rabbi Meir. V'Chachamim Omrim Bizmanan. The Chachamim say you do it at the normal time. Reason is the Chachamim say you don't have to burn it. You could throw it in the sea. You could throw it out. You could give it to animals. All of these things you can do to destroy it. So the Chachamim say you would do it on Shabbos. Rabbi Elazar bar Tzadok Omer. Rabbi Elazar bar Tzadok says, Teruma melifnei haShabbos v'chulin bizmanam. Rabbi Elazar bar Tzadok says, with regards to teruma, that you won't be able to give to anybody, what should you do? So the Mishnah says that if it's teruma, you should get rid of it before Shabbos, and if it's chulin, if it's not sacred chametz, then those things can be burnt up on Shabbos itself. Can be gotten rid of on Shabbos. Now, moving on to Mishnah Zion by way of some words of introduction. The process of biur chametz is only midrabanan, and that's because biblically it would suffice for us to just negate our chametz and to get rid of it in that way. So the process of biur chametz is only commanded to us by the rabbis. And it's there as a safeguard in case we forgot to mentally dispose of our chametz. Says the Mishnah, "Haholech lishchot es pischo." He's on his way to sacrifice his korban pesach. He's on the way up to Yerushalayim in order to slaughter his korban pesach. And what happens while he's on the way? Or he's on the way v'lamules bano. He's on the way to circumcise his son, which is a mitzvah d'oraisa. V'lechol su'udas erusin. Or he's on the way to eat a feast to celebrate his betrothal, b'veis chamav, in the house of his father-in-law. With his kashi, yesh lo chametz b'soch beison. He realizes, oh boy, he's left chametz at home. Im yachol, if he can, lachzor levayr v'lachzor lemitzvah. So then he should go back and destroy it, and then go on to do the mitzvah. And the reason why that is so surprising is because we said that beer is a rabbinic expectation. A bris milah, for example, is a biblical mitzvah. And nonetheless, it says if you're able to go back, then you should go back and then go back on to do the mitzvah. Yachazor vivaren, go back and remove it, destroy it. V'imlav, if you're not able to do it, mevat lo belibo, then you should annul it in your heart and remove any expectations of ownership over these items. That's what you should do. Lahatsil min anachrin, if you are on the way to save people from an incoming invasion from non-Jews, umin hanahar, or to save someone from a river, umin alistim, or to save someone from a robber, umin adleika, to save from a fire, umin polis, or to save from a collapsed building, then you really shouldn't rush back in order to take care of your chametz. Rather, yivatel belibo, the Mishnah says, you should just remove all feelings of ownership, nullify this chametz in your heart, and that would be sufficient in this kind of situation. V'lishbos shavisas harashus, if you are just, I've got written here, taking a vacation. If you're just kind of going on this way, on this journey for your pleasure, voluntarily, then the Mishnah says, Yachazor miyad. It's more important that you return, whether that means you'd have to miss your flight or not, to go back and destroy chametz. We'll have to leave that for further research, but an interesting concept nonetheless. Final Mishnah in our Perek, Mishnah Ches. So sacrifices are supposed to be eaten within the walls of Yerushalayim. If you go outside of the walls, then you have to burn it in Yerushalayim. Question is, do you have to make the effort to come back in? So let's have a look. V'chein mi sheyatza miYerushalayim, person who is going out of Yerushalayim, v'nizkar sheyesh biyado b'sar kodesh, and he realizes, oy vavoy, I have some sacrificial meat with me here. Im avar tzofim, if he's gone past Har Tzofim, Mount Scopus, sorfo b'makomo, then it's considered Jerusalem still, and he should burn it where he is. Ve'im lav, chozer v'sorfo lifnei habira meyatze hamaracha. Then he should return and he should burn it lifnei habira. He should burn it in front of the altar pile, the wood, meyatze hamaracha, with wood taken from the Mizbeah, from the base Hamikdash. V'ad kama hein chozrim. And how far should you, how much should you be carrying before it's a big issue that you have to return to burn it up? Rabbi Meir says, zev zev chabetza. For all instances, it's the size of an egg. Rabbi Huda Omer, zev zev b'kazayis. Rabbi Huda says, it's the amount of an olive bulb. V'chachamim omrim, b'sar kodesh b'kazayis. If you are having to return on account of sacrificial meat, then the measurement is a kazayis. V'chametz. And how much should you be returning for if you realize, oy vavoy, you've left chametz at home? So then we are taught by the chachamim that amount is a kabetza. It is an egg's bulk that you would have to go back. Mazel tov, everybody, on finishing chapter 3. And now let's move on to chapter 4. We're only 19 minutes in, guys. We can still get finished by 9:30. Are you ready? Do you have any questions before we move on? No. Alrighty then, guys. Here we go. Chapter 4. Okay. Says the Mishnah Aleph. Makom shenahagu la'asos melacha. So we're talking about the prevalent customs. We're going to see it touches on things to do with Pesach, and then it's going to touch on other areas as well, which is the amazing thing about Mishnahs. Thematically, sometimes you get into a particular topic or a particular structure, and then we find that we explore other areas of halacha, which all tie in to the same kind of idea. Says the Mishnah, Makom shenahagu la'asos melacha ba'arvei Pesachim ad chatzos. It would seem that it is not universally agreed upon as to whether you can do melacha on Erev Pesach. So, if you are in a place where the minhag is that it's acceptable to do melacha up until midday of Erev Pesach, then the Mishnah says, Osin, and you can go ahead and do it. Makom shenahagu shelo la'asos, but if you're in a place where they don't have the custom of working up until midday, says the Mishnah, Einosin, you should not do it. Says the Mishnah, Hahonech mimakom she'osin lemakom she'einosin. If you live in a place where it would be customary to do melacha until chatzos, until midday on Erev Pesach, and you are going to a place where you shouldn't be doing it, or vice versa, or mimakom she'einosin lemakom she'osin, or you're going from a place where they don't do it, and you're heading to a place where they do melacha, nosin alav chumrei makom, then you should accept upon yourself the stringencies, or the stricter, the stricter opinions of the place. So you should accept upon yourself the stricter rulings from the place where you've come from and the place where you're going to. And a person should not act differently from the local custom of the place where he is, because we do not want machlokes to come about. Continues the Mishnah, Kayotze Bo, in a similar vein. So, by way of introduction to this, in the year of Shvius, in the 7th year of the Shemitah cycle, so anything that is grown becomes hefker, it's ownerless. But ultimately, we need to have food for being able to feed our animals and things like that. Therefore, if it reaches the point of the year where a particular type of food is going to be unavailable, so then you have to do something called bi'ur. You have to make your produce hefker again, so that animals from different places can eat it. Okay, so Kayotze Bo, says the Mishnah, in a similar vein, when it comes to another area of halacha, where different areas will have different stringencies, Hamolich Peiros Shavias Mimakom Shikalu Lemakom Shinokalu. If you are transporting produce that was grown during Shavias from a place where this product has already ceased to be available, and you're now going to a place where it is still widely available, right? Meaning you've gone from a place where you should be doing biur, where you should be making it available, and you're going to a place where it's still available widely, or you're going you're going from a place where it's still widely available to a place where it is no longer available. Says the Mishnah, Chayav Leva'er. You have to do biur to it. You have to make it hefker so that everyone has access to it. Rabbi Yehuda says, Omrim lot seva lecha afata. Rabbi Yehuda says you can say to them, go out and bring the produce for yourself. Meaning, if you are in a place now without this food, then you have to do biur. And if not, then you don't have to do biur, even though you came from a place where biur had already done. So it seems that it's a bit more lenient than we saw in the last Mishnah, where it said to take on the stringencies. It seems, I think, that Rabbi Yehuda is coming up with a bit more of a lenient approach to this. Continuing with Mishnah Gimel. We are regarding selling animals to non-Jews. That's what the topic of this Mishnah is discussing. Biblically, there is no problem selling animals to non-Jewish people in Israel. But rabbinically, if a Jew owned an animal which he lent out to a non-Jewish person, then officially the animal cannot work on Shabbos, and therefore they extended this as a safeguard. They extended the restriction to selling, because the animal may do malacha through this non-Jewish person. Now, some places extended this restriction to any animal, even if they're not animals that do work, that do malacha, that would, work in a field, for example. And even if the animal is too young or too injured to do malacha, in some places it was forbidden to sell those animals as well. So that is a little bit of background to this Mishnah. Makom shenahagu limkor behema daka lagoyim. In a place where it was acceptable to sell domesticated animals to non-Jewish people, the Mishnah says, machrin, then you can sell. Makom shenahagu shelo limkor. If you were in a place where the custom was to not sell domesticated animals to non-Jewish people, then the Mishnah says, ein machrin, you should not sell. V'chol makom, in any event, in all places, ein mochin lahem behema gasa. You should not sell to the non-Jewish person a large animal, agalim, calves, usyachim, foals, shleimim ushavurim, whether they are complete and able to work, ushavurim, or whether they are broken, maimed, defective. Rabbi Yehuda matir b'shavur. Rabbi Yehuda permits in the case of maimed, injured, defective. Ben Beseira matir b'sus, and Ben Beseira permits being able to sell horses to non-Jewish people. And the reason for that is because horses are used to carry people, and it would seem that biblically that is permitted on Shabbos. And so because the worst that this non-Jewish person will be able to do is a rabbinic violation, therefore we don't have to be concerned, according to Ben Beseira, of selling it on to a non-Jew. Continuing with Mishnah Dalet, which relates again to the night of Pesach. So we're back in our Pesach-related Mishnahs. After the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, there were people who had the minhag to still eat roast meat, even though they didn't have the Korban Pesach. And some people had the custom, as we're familiar with, to not eat roasted meat, in case people were to think that we were eating a Korban Pesach. That's why nowadays we roast an egg, which is a remembrance to this. So that is one piece of background to the Mishnah. The second piece of background to this Mishnah is that on the night of Shabbos, we light candles because we need to see when we are eating. But there were some who didn't light for Yom Kippur, because on Yom Kippur you don't eat. So the historical connection or the historical reason for lighting Shabbos candles is because we don't want it to be dark in our houses and be discomforted and risk getting into arguments if we, stub our toe on the side of the bed and things like that. So we lit candles in order that we should be able to see. But there apparently was a custom on Yom Kippur to not light candles because you weren't eating. So the tradition was at variance. So says the Mishnah, Makom shenagu le'echol tzli b'leilei Pesachim. In a place where they have the custom of eating roast meat on the night of Pesach, the Mishnah says, Oichlin, then you should eat. Makom shenagu shelo le'echol ein ochlin. But if you're in a place where it's customary not to eat, then you should not eat. Makom shenagu lahadlik es haner b'leilei Yom Kippurim. If you're in a place where it's customary to light a candle on the night of Yom Kippur, madlikin, then you should light. Makom shenagu shelo lahadlik. And if you're in a place where it was customary not to light, ein madlikin, then you should not light. Nonetheless, says the Mishnah, madlikin babate kanesias babate midrashos, you would light in the shuls and in the study halls because people would need to be able to see over there. Uvamavaos ha'afelim, and in dark alleyways, va'al gabe acholin, and you would be lighting for the sake of people who are unwell. You would be lighting candles for them as well. Moving on to Mishnah Hey. There is no formal prohibition to not work on Tisha B'Av, but because we have formal mourning customs, avelut, so there was a custom prevalent to not do melacha on Tisha B'Av. Says the Mishnah, Makom shenahagu la'asos melacha b'Tisha B'Av osin. If you're in a place where the custom is to do work on the 9th of Av, then you should do it. Makom shenahagu shelo la'asos melacha. If you're in a place where the custom was to not work on Tisha B'Av, says the Mishnah, ein osin, then you should not work. Uv'chol makom, In any event, Talmidei Chachamim B'Teilin. Talmidei Chachamim should not be doing malacha on Tisha B'Av. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says, La'olam yaseh adam b'atzmo tamin chacham. A person should really try and make themselves out as if they were a Talmid Chacham, meaning, according to Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, it's appropriate for everybody to restrict themselves from doing work on Tisha B'Av. The Chachamim say, B'Yehuda hayu osim malacha ba'arvei Pesachim achatzos. In the region of Yehuda, they would do work on Erev Pesach up until midday. Uvegalil lo hayu osim kolika. And in the Galil region, in the Galilee, they would not do any work at all. Halayla, with regards to the night of searching for chametz, so the night before, the night of the 13th, Beis Shammai osrim, Beis Shammai forbid doing any work, Ubeis Hillel matirin ad hanetz chama, and Beis Hillel permits doing work up until sunrise of the following morning, at which point then you should desist from doing any malacha, unless of course you're in a place where you're allowed to. Continuing with Mishnah Vav, other jobs that you should not be doing on Erev Pesach. Says the Mishnah, Rabbi Meir says, Kol malacha shehischil ba kodem la'arba'asa, any work that you started, any projects as it were, that you started before the 14th of Nisan, Gom Rabba Arba'asa, then you can still finish on the 14th. Aval, lo yaschil ba batchila ba'arba'asa, but you should not start a new job, a new project on the 14th, Afal pi shiachol legamra, even though there would be time to finish it. The Chachamim say, and you're probably well ahead of me on this one, Shalosh umaniyos osim melacha ba'arvei Pesachim achatzos. There are three crafts, there are three professions which would be permitted to still continue with on Erev Pesach until Chatzos. Ve'eluhein, and these are they. Hachayatim, tailors, to be able to make sure that people have got clothes for Yom Tov. Va'asaparim, and barbers, hairdressers, of course, otherwise how are we going to get through the Omer? So they're allowed to work still. Vahakosin, and laundrymen, because we need clean clothes. Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda Omer, Afar Etzanim, even shoemakers would be allowed to work, because again, people need good shoes to be able to go up to Yerushalayim. So all of these professions you would still be allowed to carry on with on Erev Pesach right up until Chatzos. Other jobs in Mishnah Zayin which would be allowed on Erev Pesach. Moshiven, Shovachin Latonagolim Ba'arba'asa. You are allowed, it says here, to set up chicken houses for fowls on the on Erev Pesach, meaning that you are allowed to farm chickens and farm eggs on the 14th. For Tarnagolis Shabarchan, if you have a chicken that has run away, says the Mishnah, Machazirin Osalim and Makoma, then you can go about what you need to do to get it back in place. The Mesa, and if a chicken dies, Moshivin Acheres Tachteha, then you can put another chicken on top of the eggs that chicken was warming and that chicken was protecting. You can bring in another chicken to go on top of it. Continues the Mishnah. Gorfin mitachas ragle behema barba'asa. You are allowed to clean away the manure from underneath the legs of animals on the 14th. Uva moed mesalkin etzdadin. And on Pesach itself, you should only remove it to one side. Interestingly, the halacha that you're allowed to clean away the manure on Erev Pesach, that would seem to apply, according to many Rishonim at least, even after Chatzos. Continues the Mishnah, Molichin Movin Kalim and Beis Ha'uma. You would be allowed to transport vessels to and from the house of the person who has been crafting them, even if they are not required for the festival itself. You would still be allowed all day to bring these things backwards and forwards. Whew, we are on Mishnah Ches. I love this one. I mean, they're all amazing, but the next couple of Mishnahs are really quite unique. So we're going to talk about 6 things that the rabbis did not like the people of Jericho doing. Although, as we'll see, they only protested and objected to 3 of these things. So that says the Mishnah. Shisha devarim asu anshe Yericho. There are 6 things that the people of Jericho, of Jericho would do. Three of these things the rabbis would protest about, and about three of them they would not protest about. What are these things? Says the Mishnah. These are the things that they would not protest against, even though they didn't like it. Markivin dekalim kol hayom. They would graft palm trees all day on Erev Pesach and wouldn't stop, even at Chatzos. V'chorchin es Shema. They wrapped up the Shema, meaning they did not say Baruch Shem Kavod Malchusah Leolam Va'ed between Shema and Ve'ahavta. It would seem that they would not do this, and even though the rabbis didn't approve, they didn't protest nonetheless. Continues the Mishnah with the third thing: the kotzrin, the godshin, lifnei ha'omer, and they would harvest and they would stack their produce before the omer, before the time at which they would start to reap the harvest, which was after Pesach had started. But with all of these things, v'lo michu v'yadam, they would not protest. Ve'elu shemichu v'yadam, these are the things that they would protest about. Matirin gamzias shel hekdesh, the people of Jericho permitted soft branches that grew in fields that were hekdesh. They shouldn't be allowed to give these away, but it would seem that these people did give them away, perhaps not realizing that they were sacred property, and the rabbis of Yericho would protest about this. And they would eat from fruit that fell off trees on Shabbos. So because we're not allowed to take things off trees on Shabbos, it's forbidden to do that. It would also be forbidden for us to eat anything that falls off the tree as well. But they did it, and the rabbis got upset about it. Continues the Mishnah, V'nosnin peah leyarak, and they would give peah from vegetables. So what's the problem with this? They would give these things as peah, which is a particular type of portion that you would divide up. But the trouble is that they would give it from things that were very long-lasting, that had a long shelf life. And because they did that, they thought that they then did not need to take terumas and maasros, so the different tithes. They thought they wouldn't need to do that because they were giving these vegetables to poor people, and they did need to do that. So that was what the people of Jericho did. And as the Mishnah ends off, the rabbis would protest about the fact that they were doing these things, even though they weren't supposed to. Continuing with the final Mishnah in chapter 4, we've got 5 minutes left, guys. We can do this. We will reach our 9:30 deadline, and you can all be tucked up in bed in the next few minutes. Says the Mishnah, Shisha Devarim Asla Chizkiyahu HaMelech, 6 things that Chizkiyahu HaMelech did. Shlosha Hodula, 3 of these things were approved of by the Chachamim, Shlosha Lo Hodula, and 3 of these things were not approved by the Chachamim. What are the 3 things? Let's have a look. Gera Atzmos Aveh. We see that he dragged the bones of his father, Al Mitat Shel Chavalim, on a rope coffin. That was number 1. V'hodu lo chachamim, and the rabbis approved of it. You see, if I'm not mistaken, his father was not such a great guy, and so as a way of giving him a bit of kapara, a bit of atonement, so his kavura, his burial, even though he was a king, he didn't get the burial that perhaps would have befitted a king. And nonetheless, even though this was inappropriate to treat royalty in this way, because of who he was, the Chachamim nonetheless thought that what he had done was appropriate. The second thing, Kitas Nachash Hanachoshes. He chopped down the bronze serpent that Moshe Rabbeinu had put up back when people were needing a refuah from the plague that afflicted them in the desert. So because it got to a point where people were maltreating this copper snake, he chopped it down. So even though Moshe had been commanded to make it, he crushed it up and got rid of it, and the rabbis approved of this. And the third thing is Ganaz Sefer Refuos. What's the word? Thank you. Yeah, it says it on the screen there. He hid the Book of Remedies, which was a very helpful book to be able to treat people for illnesses, but he wanted people to have more reliance on God. And so he buried that book, and the rabbis were okay with it. About three things did they not approve of. He removed the doors from the temple and sent them to the king of Assyria, and he should have had more bitachon. He should have had more security within himself that Hashem would help. They did not approve. Not only that, but he tried to stop the water supply to the army of the Assyrians. But again, he should have had more reliance on Hashem, and so they did not approve of this. He was stopping the flow coming to the old city of Jerusalem. And the third thing he did was Ibar Nisan b'Nisan. He made another Adar. He made a leap year after it had already become Nisan. But you're not supposed to do that when it's become Nisan. You're supposed to do that before Nisan officially starts. You can't do it later than the 29th of Adar. It seems, however, that he did. And for that, the rabbis did not agree with him. Mazel tov, everybody, on finishing chapter 4 of Maseches Pesachim. That's all for tonight. Come join us for the after party on Zoom. But for now, we wish you a wonderful and meaningful night. And we'll see you again next week for, please God, chapter 5, chapter 6, and who knows? Maybe we'll get another one in next week on Mishnah Mastery. Cue the music. Take care, everyone.